I'm Chad Moyer. I'm a farm broadcaster with KTIC Radio and the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. I work for you, the cooperatively owned group of 14 radio stations across the state of Nebraska and our standalone network. So I've been here going on 17 years, just happy as all get out to serve you guys in agriculture here in Nebraska. Thanks for being here. This is going to be a great session. It's going to be a mixed session. We are going to have a presentation, and then we are also going to have some interaction and some discussions, some question and answers and things like that. The gentleman who is going to take us through this discussion about the next Farm Bill, what to expect from it, is a man who has, he's really served in all levels of government. Just amazing to look at his resume and his sheet of accomplishments and things of that nature, starting, with the mayor of Lincoln and being on the Lancaster board, working his way up to being governor of the great state of Nebraska, serving the country as the Secretary of Agriculture, and then of course as a senator representing the state of Nebraska here as well. And I've learned since that public service, he continues to serve agriculture. He's on the advisory board for Deere and Company, for Corteva Agriscience, for Burlington Capital and the OSI Group. So just obviously very qualified, very knowledgeable, very connected, and still with a desire to serve agriculture. And as I talked to Mike before this program, he made the comment to me, and it really resonated with me, that the way he serves today is agriculture. His interest is serving and advising on agriculture, and we are just so happy that he is here today and that he is serving in that capacity. Would you please put a hand together for Secretary Mike Johanns?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Chad. That was very nice. I appreciate it. If I was a smart politician, what I would do is say, thank you, are there any questions, and move on. But I've never been a smart politician. Let me start out and do something that is very meaningful to me personally, and I start all of my speeches this way by introducing somebody who is very, very special. Now, in the old days, I would introduce this person as my spouse, my wife. These days, I introduce her as the driver, the chief of staff, the director of communications, all things Johanns. Yeah, that's right. So, Stephanie, please stand up. It is great to be back. Larry, there was all this listing of titles that I've had, but you and I know which is the best job, right?
Iowa Farm Boy.
There you go. I was thinking county commissioner, but that was good too. So today, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Farm Bill. Of course, the calendar is going to flip over here pretty quickly, and we're going to be looking at a Farm Bill. And the whole idea is to get this Farm Bill done probably before the August recess. That would be the hope, if you will. So already, if you go online, you can read a lot of articles about what people might expect or what they might anticipate. What I'm going to try to do today is give you a glimpse of how I believe, based on my years of experience there, how I believe this next Farm Bill is going to come together. I'm going to talk about what I call the 3 P's of the Farm Bill. I'm going to talk about the people, because after all, somebody's going to write this thing, right? I'm going to talk about the politics. Now, that may shock you that there's some politics going on in Washington. And then I'm going to talk about the policy. What happens after these people, the politics plays out? What kind of policy can you anticipate as you're starting to think about what the next Farm Bill is going to be like? So let me start where I said I would, with the people. Well, we just had an election in Georgia. I think most of us were paying attention to that. And now we have the results. Herschel has conceded and acknowledged that he did not get enough votes. So Senator Warnock was reelected. What does that mean? What that means is that on the Senate side, there are now 51 Democrats and there are 49 Republicans. Before, it was a 50-50 situation. Now, the key to that is that that meant that committee assignments were divided 50-50. The chair was a Democrat, but the committees were 50-50. So the only way anything moved out of committee is if there was some kind of consensus on that committee. So applying that to the Ag Committee on the Senate side, what that would have meant is you needed Democrats and Republicans to get on the same page to get something out of the Senate. Now, there's a majority on the Senate Ag Committee. There's a majority on every committee for that matter. That majority is controlled by Democrats. The chair will be a Democrat. So who is that person? That person is a woman by the name of Debbie Stabenow. And Debbie has a great deal of experience. She knows farm policy, and she also knows a couple of things about how to get this bill done. She was chair during the last Farm Bill process when I was in the United States Senate. She's actually quite good to work with, and she knows a couple of things about how this is going to have to proceed. She knows that she cannot go to the Senate floor and try to get a bill done that would be called a Democrat farm bill. She knows that she has to get 60 votes on the Senate floor to get this passed. This is not the kind of legislation I believe that they will try to do by reconciliation. So she's going to have to start building this farm bill and writing this farm bill with input from the other side of the aisle, even though they are a minority on the committee as a result of the Georgia election. So her goal is to be able to get a farm bill out of the Senate Ag Committee that she thinks she can take to the floor and get more than 60 votes to get it passed. Because of the filibuster, they need 60 votes. Who's on the other side of the aisle? A gentleman by the name of Bozeman, and he's out of Arkansas. John Bozeman. He's a great guy, and let me just make a prediction because of where he calls home. I'm going to tell you, standing here in the Midwest, that southern crops are going to be protected in this farm bill. This farm bill isn't going to move unless John Bozeman signs off and gives the thumbs up and says, I'm good with it. That means look for rice, cotton, peanuts primarily. They'll be handled, they'll be taken care of in the next farm bill. He is the kind of person that will work with Debbie Stabenow. So it will be really a Bozeman-Stabenow bill when it's all said and done, because they both know the math. They both know that it has to have 60 votes. Now they're going to get pressured. You know, Republicans are pressure Bozeman, Democrats are going to pressure Debbie Stabenow, but they can't go too far in any direction. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. They're going to have to try to carve out that kind of centrist sort of approach that keeps people on board to get this farm bill done. Who are some of the other players, names that you might hear as this goes along? There's a senator from Ohio by the name of Sherrod Brown. I think by any definition, he's a pretty liberal guy, Democrat. He comes out of Ohio. He's up for re-election in 2 years. He would like to have something in this farm bill because it's probably one of the few bills that's really going to pass in the next couple of years. He's going to want to be able to claim some sort of victory here. Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota, you probably recognize that name, not only because of proximity, but Amy Klobuchar ran for president. Democrat, very knowledgeable, very open to working across the aisle. So again, I think she will position herself to get a farm bill done. Kirsten Gillibrand from New York. I know Kirsten very well. I'm going to tell you that I don't think she's really on the Ag Committee to make sure that the Farm Bill pays attention to cotton or wheat or corn or whatever. She's going to pay attention to the nutrition title. She's going to want to make sure that this Farm Bill doesn't take any steps backward on the nutrition title. Gary Booker from New Jersey, I could say the same thing as I just said for Kirsten. Their goal, by and large, on that side of the aisle, is going to be to protect those programs that finance the nutrition piece of the Farm Bill. And they're going to want to make sure that there's no backtracking, which is going to be a point of real debate in contention. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that. On the Republican side, some of the players are people that you've heard about. John Hoeven from North Dakota. John's a big influence. He has a long track record in North Dakota. He was a banker there. He was a governor there. He came to the Senate very well experienced and almost immediately had an impact on farm policy. So John Hoeven will be a key person. Joni Ernst from Iowa. We know Joni because it's the next state over, and no question about it, Joni is a player when it comes to farm policy. Chuck Grassley. Chuck has been in the United States Senate for a long time. I used to sit next to Chuck at lunch, and I said to him one day, I said, Chuck, when did you first run for a public office? He said, 1955. I said, Chuck, do you realize I was 5 years old when you... he's a very influential person. He's been on that Ag Committee for a long time. He will put some markers down. He'll want the Farm Bill to reflect what he needs for Iowa, for the Midwest, and so he'll be a powerful force. John Thune from South Dakota, very high-ranking member of leadership, second in command from a leadership standpoint on the Republican side, comes out of South Dakota. Again, he's going to have a very big influence. And then Deb Fischer. Deb Fischer came to the Senate with a huge ag pedigree. Not only did she come from the state of Nebraska, she knew what it meant to live in a rural area, to be a rancher. And so Deb's one of these people, when she speaks, everybody's going to lean forward just because she comes with that great pedigree, that great background, very respected person in the Senate. Now, I've only talked about half the equation here today because, of course, you can't get a farm bill passed if you don't get the same identical farm bill passed in the House Ag Committee. Now, the dynamics on the House side got kind of interesting in the last election. Remember all of the talk about the red wave and Republicans were going to have a huge majority and they were going to be in control? What didn't happen? Majority did change, but it's going to be by 5-6 members. You're right. It is such a tight majority. Now here's another thing I would tell you, and I'm not trying to proclaim whose politics is better here, but there are about 40 members in the House, Republicans, who did not come to Washington to pass big spending bills. That's not why they're there. They didn't campaign on that. They didn't promise that that's what they're going to do. In fact, they campaigned on a very different message. The message that they campaigned on, the promises that they made, is we're going to reign in Washington. So anyone who is out there thinking today, well, the House is now controlled by Republican votes and they can pass things by a majority vote, don't assume that you've got all the Republicans voting for the Farm Bill, because I would suggest that there's about 40 that I can't imagine are going to ever want to vote for a Farm Bill. It is a huge package. and I just can't believe that they will get there. But because the House changed to Republican majority, who heads the committees changes, the majority on the committee changes, so majority members on every committee will now be Republicans. We're going to get a new chair. The new chair is a gentleman by the name of G.T. Thompson, comes out of Pennsylvania, very knowledgeable, great background. He knows his way around the Farm Bill, knows his way around farm policy, and man, he is raring to go. You know, in the House, you can wait a lot of years to get a committee chair, and he's got it, and he's going to go out, and he's going to hold hearings, and he's going to do listening sessions, and like I said, he's ready to go. Here's what he has said about the Farm Bill so far, and this is very interesting. He has said, look, this Farm Bill is going to be a bipartisan bill. Now let me translate that for you. What he's saying is, look, I don't think there's anything I could do to get a Farm Bill passed by just Republicans in the House. And the only chance I have of getting a Farm Bill not only to the floor of the House, but to get it passed and to marry it up with the Senate version, because there will be two versions. They're each going to do their own thing on this time around. He knows that the only way that's going to happen for him is to get a bipartisan bill. And that has a profound impact on what this bill is going to look like. So today I'm going to say to you that the chair, Debbie Stabenow on the Senate side, the chair on the House side, Thompson, are both singing from the same hymn book. They're saying, we got to get a bipartisan bill. Got to get a bill that Republicans vote for and Democrats vote for, because we can't get it done either way. Now, that's easier said than done. Let me just spend a brief moment on the ranking member. Ranking member's a gentleman by the name of David Scott. Congressman Scott is now the chair of the House Ag Committee, but he's leaving because the majority changed. But kind of the prediction is, we'll know more about this in the next few weeks, is that he will stay as the ranking member on the Democrat side. Now, one of the things that I heard when I first got to Washington is somebody said to me, I won't quote who it was, but they said to me, you know, Mike, just want to warn you, Washington is a cruel place. I won't go into that anymore. The reason I mention that is, stay tuned. Politico, which is kind of an inside the Beltway daily newspaper sort of thing, wrote an extensive article quoting from other people that David Scott was not mentally capable to be chair. Well, that's pretty rough stuff. So I don't know if that means that somebody is out there trying to get his job. It probably does. But like I said, stay tuned. I would still bet that he's probably going to be the ranking member. Now let me talk about the political atmosphere, because of course that's going to play in here. As I mentioned just a second ago, there's going to be a House version and there's going to be a Senate version. If we ever had any hope that the House would sit down with the Senate, at this stage at least, and come out with this kind of joint proposal, I think we can set that aside. That's not going to happen. You're going to get a House version, you're going to get a Senate version. We don't know today where the baseline spending is. When I went out to Washington as Secretary of Agriculture, one of the things that George W. wanted me to do was submit an administration farm bill. He wanted to be in the mix. And so I was the last secretary, and before that, I don't know when the last secretary was that actually sat down, wrote a farm bill, and submitted it, legislative text and all. But where we started, folks, is with the spending piece of this. Because if you don't know what the budget is, you don't have any idea what this is going to look like. Now, we will get good information in 2 or 3 months as to how much is available to be spent on the Farm Bill. But I think we can, based on USDA numbers, we can make a pretty good guess. In the overall USDA budget, now I'm not talking about the Farm Bill, I'm talking about the overall entire USDA budget. This very nice woman in front of me, when I would meet with her and sign off on her part of the USDA budget, Nancy, how much was done? 70%? Yeah. So Nancy, who is from Nebraska and who worked with me as governor, came out to Washington, and you were Undersecretary of Food and Nutrition. So when we were done with our budget meeting with Nancy, she just walked out with 70 cents on the dollar. And roughly, I think it was a little bit less at the time. But that's currently what it is, the entire USDA budget. The conservation and commodity titles of the Farm Bill, the things that you and I pay a lot of attention to, 14% of the spending. Forestry is about 5%, and all other, you know, the administration of the department and on and on and on, is about 11%. So you see where the spending is at in the USDA budget. As I said, the farm baseline is not done yet, but using 10-year projections, because this is how it's scored. It'll be a 5-year bill. I'm not suggesting it'll be a 10-year bill, but it's always scored by the Congressional Budget Office on what it will cost over a 10-year period of time. The numbers are pretty eye-popping. The amount spent will be $1,295 billion over the next 10 years. So where does that money go? Now I'm talking just about the Farm Bill. In the nutrition title of that $1,295 billion, $1,090 billion will go for nutrition. The vast, vast majority of that is in the SNAP program. It's the new title that actually came about when I was secretary for the old food stamp program. So $1,090 billion. Conservation over those 10 years will spend about $59 billion. Crop insurance will be about $80 billion. And pay attention to what I'm just going to say. The commodity program will be about $56 billion. So when you pay your crop insurance premium and you buy crop insurance for your operation, that actually is more of the USDA Farm Bill budget than the commodity titles. Crop insurance has been very, very well accepted. We hoped it would be, because everybody puts some skin in the game, if you know what I'm saying. It's a good program. And so it has got broad acceptance, and it actually spends more money than the commodity title. Trade is about $4.8 billion, and then the rest is spent over just a whole variety of programs. So to put that in context, nutrition now in this next Farm Bill will spend about 84%, 84 cents on every dollar for the Farm Bill. Supplemental spending won't be in the baseline. So all of the things that come along after the Farm Bill, since the last Farm Bill, won't go into the baseline. And that's a sizable amount of money that will be set off to the side. You don't get to consider that in terms of the amount of money that would be available for the Farm Bill. Trump paid $25 billion out for retaliatory tariffs. You remember that program? COVID spent about $30 billion on agriculture, various COVID legislation. 60 billion rather, additional went to nutrition programs. I'll stop there for a moment. That's a piece that the Democrats don't want to give up. The nutrition program was significantly improved during COVID. because people couldn't work, they couldn't get out, whatever the justification was, and that will be a line in the sand for Democrats. They'll say, nope, wherever that money has to come from, we're not going to sign off on a farm bill until that is somehow provided for in the next bill, because they feel that if they give up on that, they're taking a step back, and they don't want to do that. The Inflation Reduction Act added about $17 billion, largely for conservation programs. The Disaster Assistance added about $15 billion. Various programs came along because of disasters in various parts of the country. So a substantial amount of money gets spent after the Farm Bill, but it won't be included in the baseline. So before I get to the policy, I want to share with you where I believe the battlegrounds will be. And let's fast forward to late July of this coming year, 2023, and everybody's frustrated because Washington can't get a farm bill done. Let me tell you what I think they'll be fighting about back there. They'll be fighting about conservation and nutrition. Why conservation? Everybody likes conservation, right? Well, Democrats like the idea of using the conservation title to deal with climate change issues. And so they're going to want to push that title further along the pathway of helping solving the climate change issue. So stay tuned. There's going to be a battle about that. Republicans are not enamored, and the two chairs are not enamored. Or I shouldn't say that. The ranking member, Bozeman, and the chair on the House committee are not enamored with that idea. Nutrition, we've already spent some time talking about that. Folks, that's the battleground. Now, some of you are out there saying, you know, Mike, I hear this every darn farm bill. Why is the farm bill tied to the nutrition program? Why are we doing it that way? That doesn't make any sense to me. Can't get a farm bill passed without it. Why? Look out House membership. There's districts that don't have farmers. They're completely urban. So, and then you add into it those who don't want to vote for spending packages like this. You just can't figure out where the votes would come from. So this marriage is created between really two different sets of people. And that's why the two are joined together, and I just don't anticipate that that's going to change. So nutrition, conservation, climate change, I think are going to be big issues. So let me, if I might now, jump to the end, near the end of my comments, and talk to you about what I think this farm bill is going to look like. After all the personalities, after all the politics, after all the regional differences, after all the differences about crops and conservation and nutrition, here's what I think we're going to end up with. Number one, I'm not expecting a revolutionary farm bill. I know what the House Study Committee, very conservative group of Republicans, said. We're just not going to change this farm bill dramatically. I think it's going to be a pretty much stay the course sort of farm bill. I do think you'll see some tinkering with reference prices. The feeling is, you know, crop prices have gotten higher, input costs have gotten higher, so expect some tinkering with reference prices. Chairman Thompson mentioned something about a margin approach. I don't think it's going to happen. And in fact, his most recent comments have kind of backed away from that. The conservation title, I predict, will get some more funding, may get some pilot projects that Democrats can say, boy, we really went after climate change with this farm bill, but I don't think it's going to be a dramatic shift in the philosophy of conservation. Crop insurance will continue as your major safety net. Crop insurance will be improved, but probably on an administration basis. In other words, not necessarily through the legislation, but improved through USDA programs. I believe to get the Farm Bill done, the nutrition title will be fully funded. Now, you can stand up and disagree with me with that as a policy, but I think that's what it's going to have to take to get it done. I think you'll see some expansion in some programs just so they can claim that they got something more done, maybe some more farmers markets, something like that, but it won't be dramatic. All other programs, I believe, will be pretty status quo. Rural development, etc. I don't think they'll change much. I could give an hour speech on the Commodity Credit Corporation, and maybe you'll ask me a question about that, but I do think there's going to be some guardrails put on that. I just think it's been the honeypot for every idea out there on the Republican and Democrat side, and it never was intended to be that. It was intended to support prices. Now it's just like every program that comes along, the secretary runs to commodity credit and pulls money up because you have such broad discretion. So I think that will be an issue. You'll hear a lot about regenerative agriculture, kind of the buzzword now. We've heard a lot about sustainable agriculture, now it's regenerative agriculture. I think in the end it's not going to change much, and I don't think you're going to see a title devoted to regenerative agriculture. Last thing I'm going to mention is the sugar program. I don't know if we have any beet growers here. Most of that is out in the Scottsbluff area. I think that program is on borrowed time. Now, man, now that I've said that, I'm going to get a lot of phone calls saying, "What are you thinking? Why did you say that?" But just talking to colleagues, I just think it's a program that is going to face a lot of criticism, and has already, and it's going to continue. If I were forced to make a prediction, I think it continues, but I think the debate on what that program should look like is going to increase. So that's my thoughts. Let's sit down, take some questions, and we'll go from there.
Hey, first of all, would you give Mike a big round of applause in his presentation here today? Thank you. Our scheduled time is about 10 minutes, but if we have some good conversation, I think we have some latitude to go long. We are the last presentation, Mike, so we could be here till 3 o'clock if you really, really, really wanted to, but they are going to close the thing down at 3. I am pleased. We want your questions. We want this to be interactive. I'm going to ask the first one just to kind of get us started. When I came to Nebraska in 2007, there were a fair number of Nebraskans who were on the ag committees in the Senate and the House. If I remember right, maybe there were 4 of the 5 that were elected from here that were on that. What's the potential for some Nebraska elected representation in the crafting of the next Farm Bill?
The possibilities are excellent, as a matter of fact. This is kind of an interesting dynamic. When I got elected to the Senate, of course I'm Republican, Ben Nelson was the other senator, he's a Democrat. We actually sat down and we said, how can we maximize what we do? We didn't want doubling up on committees. We wanted to cover as much ground as we could between the two of us, with one single exception. We both wanted to be on the Ag Committee, and we weren't going to argue with each other about that. And so I think there's a great opportunity. I think whoever the next senator is, whoever replaces Senator Sass, might look to be on the Ag Committee. Of course, Deb Fischer is there, a very influential person. She went to the Ag Committee after I left, and she's done a great job there. I think the same thing on the House side. So we will be represented very well. Plus, the nice thing is at this point, like Adrian Smith, even if he's not on the Ag Committee, he's got great seniority at this point in his career. And you've got Deb Fischer, who also has great seniority, plus she's just a very well-known person now. So we'll have good influence on what the bill looks like.
Very good. All right, let's take questions from the crowd. You, sir.
Secretary Johanns, I guess your comments about federal crop, I think, are very good. It's a great safety net. It's probably one of the few federal programs, it's actually worked as the way it was designed. One of the real challenges, though, is when you look right now, of course, my District 42, we're North Platte, Lincoln County, south, and on up into the Sandhills. You know, we're dealing with a severe drought, and there were a lot of producers that are going to end up with zero dryland yields this year, which under the federal crop insurance program, 10-year average, you lose 10% of your guarantee. We move into this next year, have another year of zero. All of a sudden, we're really short on what that guarantee is going to be. Do you see that the administration within federal crop insurance program would have some latitude to create disaster years, to plug in a T yield or something to be able to help those averages from going crazy?
Let me re-ask the question for you,
please.
so everybody can hear. The question had to do with if you have multiple years of failure, of course that affects your crop insurance, the average for your crop insurance purposes. So the question is, could there be a way to change that or insert something, or how do you respond to that, Mike?
Such a great question. This is just an outstanding question, and you're right. As things get worse and worse for the producer, for the farmer out there, they're getting less and less because now it's 2 years of drought, now it's 3 years of drought, and we know in Nebraska that can happen. That has been somewhat plugged in with the additional disaster relief programs out there. But everybody in Washington is trying to get away from those ad hoc programs, just simply because they never turn out very fair. So I believe there's an opportunity to address that and minimize that impact because of the desire to get away from the ad hoc programs. One thing I would really encourage, and this would be great for like the unicameral ag committee or the new governor or whoever, to reach out to the delegation and say, you know, this is becoming a pretty serious problem in our state. We need your influence to help us get this fixed in the next farm bill. I think Debbie Stabenow would be open to that. I think John Bozeman would be open to that. So there may be an opportunity here to get something done.
Thank you.
Something that comes up with climate change, or with the crop insurance too, on occasion, is tying crop insurance or farm bill participation to something, whether that's conservation compliance and I think you brought up maybe some climate change priorities too. Is that something that we should watch, tying participation in a farm program to that?
This used to drive me nuts. Everything they do out in Washington, you know, you say, you know, my farmers are going broke because they're not harvesting the crop and the crop insurance is not covering the forward loss, and they say, oh great, that's a climate change problem, we're going to force cropping practices or et cetera, and I really don't agree with the philosophy. I want you to farm, that's what you do, and I want you to do it well, and I want to make sure that you can rely on this safety net. And my philosophy always is a minimum of government intrusion, because we've had farm policy through the years where we told you how much you could raise. You know, I don't want to go back to that. So we'll see. You know, that's a battle in Washington. It was a battle when the Republic was founded. You know, what's the role of the central government? And we'll see more of that battle play out in this farm bill.
Will from Iowa-Nebraska Equipment Dealers Association has a microphone. Anybody got a question? We're going to have him come around and get your question on the mic so that everybody can hear. Larry, go ahead.
This discussion on federal crop insurance is very apropos. Just to raw figures, last year my dryland corn yield was a year ago 169 bushels to the acre right here in North and Lancaster County. This year it was 52. Mike Jacobson used to be my banker at one time. He knows how critical it is that we have a floor underneath of us with $1,400 fertilizer and truck tires that we can't get, and so many more things as our expenses have gone up. This, what he identified as a real super problem. So anybody here, just write that letter on a plain piece of paper, get it to anybody you can. If they hear it long enough, Senator Johanns is absolutely right. They will pay attention, but they've got to hear it a lot. But that reducing your yield each year, our former president of Nebraska Farm Bureau doesn't even take, it's gotten to the place where he can't take wheat insurance anymore in Grant County out in Grant, Nebraska, because it isn't a guarantee.
And Larry, from the standpoint of a House member or a senator who's really tuned into farm programs, this was never the intention, that you would eventually, because of multiple years of disaster, end up not being able to protect yourself. I mean, it's so counterintuitive. I think that one of the big issues here is it's just not on the radar screen for a lot of people. And I think if we work to get it on the radar screen, that's why I'm saying if you can get some energy behind this, you've got the right people involved in writing the Farm Bill. If you can get some energy behind this, maybe you can get some changes. Because it's just a real fault in what is a really good program. So
It still seems to me that there's a. It seems to me that you're exactly right, Mike. I think that staying away from all these ad hoc programs, federal crop is very effective. And it seems to me the way the program was set up is it was trying to keep people from gaming the system, and encouraging people to produce yields and effectively produce yields, and they would get rewarded for a higher guarantee over county averages. But it would seem to me somewhere along the way, maybe you drop down to a floor of county average or 90% of county average, and your number doesn't drop below that. So again, my original question kind of goes back. Do you think that's an administrative change that can be done within the federal crop insurance program, or do you think the Farm Bill is going to have to specifically give them that ability?
the reason why I don't believe you're going to get this solved in an administrative way is it's got a financial impact. So you almost need to build it into how this thing is going to get scored. And then the other thing, if you do it on an administrative basis, it's not permanent. So the next group comes in and says, I need some money for over here, let's slim that down. And I much would prefer that we do it through the legislative process. Now, in the end, if that's all we got, it's all we got. But I still think we'd be better off to try to get it legislatively fixed. Needs to be fixed.
One last point, and I'll give the microphone and not talk again, but my other issue out there, and one thing I think we all need to be mindful of, is ESG, environmental, social justice, and governance. This is coming in spades, folks, and it's impacting us in every way possible. I sit on the board of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Topeka. We are a wholesale lender to commercial banks, savings and loans, and credit unions across 4-state area. When we did our annual audit, we have to comply with ESG because we're a government entity. And I can tell you the real concern on environmental test is what are you doing in terms of carbon emissions and so on. Now think about our state, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado. Energy, agriculture. So if we're going to have to start tracing our members, which are banks, credit unions, and savings and loans within those states, and they're going to have to start tracking their customers to determine what kind of emissions are there and whether or not they can continue, the Home Loan Bank, provide funding to these members is a real deal. It's a heck of a hammer, and so you're finding out with ESG scores among corporations, and if they aren't complying, they're getting beaten up. So this is going to be a big issue as we move forward with ESG. You're going to hear these words a lot. I know the legislature's pushing back on some concerns about where we're investing our money, but this is going to be a real issue, and I'm hoping it doesn't go too heavy because agriculture is right there in the target area of how they're going to pound on us, potentially on programs as well.
Yeah, that's a whole nother seminar, but you have really hit the nail on the head. And this is going to be a debate. It's going to be a debate in the conservation title. There are those in Washington that will want to tie funding to what you're doing in terms of carbon footprint and whatever else. And so, again, you're right. Pay attention here, because this is just going to be a big flashpoint in trying to get a farm bill across the finish line. No question.
Mike, maybe I could ask you about maybe some livestock things, because I have noticed over time too, there are more livestock things that are being picked up in the Farm Bill. The vaccine bank, dairy margin coverage for dairy producers. What am I missing? So they're even now talking about revamping the federal milk marketing order system. Thoughts on seeing more livestock items being discussed in the Farm Bill?
Somebody told me when I became Secretary of Agriculture, somebody from Washington, they said, when you understand and can explain the dairy program and the Farm Bill, it's time for you to leave. You've been here too long. There's some truth to that. It's a very, very complex title, and you always work your way through it. Here's what I would say, though, about revamping any part of the dairy title. I strongly believe that if there isn't consensus in the industry between processors, producers, those folks out there who own the cows, you're not going to get very far, just simply because it's such a complicated program that it's very easy to run out of people on the Senate floor and the House floor who understand it well enough to argue for the changes that they want. So I think if the industry collectively came together and said, we've agreed on this, that, and the next thing, and its price tag wasn't out of control, you would get something done. But I'm not optimistic much happens beyond that. I think in terms of the cattle guys, here's a couple of thoughts I would offer. I do think that there will be the kind of typical funding you see for marketing programs, which are so important. You know, to be able to go to other parts of the world and market our beef or pork or poultry or whatever. So I do think you'll see those funded, probably funded about where they're at now. I don't think you'll see dramatic increases in funding. The other thing is, I do think you'll see some provisions for catastrophic type loss, and it happens, you know, temperature turns to 105 and cattle are dying, and I do think you'll see some programs continue in that area, but it really is that catastrophic sort of loss. The other thing I would say, and at the risk of speaking for a whole group of people, cattle guys are pretty independent, you know. They didn't come out to Washington much to tell me that they wanted new programs. They kind of told me, you know, we don't want you distorting our market. And there are good times and bad times in the cattle industry, and we know that. It's part of the deal, but I don't think you're going to see a whole big farm bill title, because I don't think there's the energy in the industry to support it. So, you'll see these programs that are helpful during difficult times.
Question? I was going to say, I remember the other one that I think it just went to comment now. It was the Library of Cattle Livestock Contracting, right? Things that are being used, so that adds to market transparency. So the vaccine bank and a library like that, they're very intentional, right? They're not broad in scope. They're very purpose fulfilled, right?
I'm glad you asked that, because it's important that I add to my response by saying, look, there are some things, and they deal with transparency, price discovery, that sort of thing. And I do think you'll continue to see a real emphasis on that. Deb Fisher and Chuck Grassley have been really very much at the cutting edge in that area. And like I said, agree or disagree with them, she is very influential in this area. And I think that debate is going to continue, no question about it.
Got time for a couple of questions. Probably take two more and then we'll kind of wrap up. Go ahead.
What do you think about payment limitations? What's going to happen there?
It's great to see you again. I saw you sitting out there. Here's what I'd say. As long as Chuck Grassley is there, you're going to continue to have a battle on payment limitations. Chuck is the champion of that. And he does not like the idea of very large farm bill type payments going out to a big producer. And so, yes, I don't even know how I would describe what the bill will look like, but very definitely you're going to see that debate continue. Now, had Chuck decided not to seek re-election, maybe it would have faded in the sunset. It won't fade in the sunset. He's passionate about this issue.
One more question in the back row.
Sure. Doug Carr from the NU Foundation, representing the Institute of Ag and Natural Resources. Kind of on the conservation side, the closing, what we hear, closing of many farms over in Norway, the Mexican president who has said that they don't want any GMO corn coming in the next round, going through there. Is there anything in the Farm Bill that helps educate the public to know where their food comes from and not getting information on Twitter from the food babe or whatever who just picks one ingredient and kind of throws it into a tizzy? Is there any communication or education that's put down either through the high schools or grade schools so students know and people just know where their food comes from?
I can't think of any kind of education program into the schools, although there's probably some funding out there that you could tie yourself to do that. I will say this, just in terms of the general purposes of the USDA in executing farm policy, we spent a tremendous amount of time in Europe, now Mexico, trying to convince people that they were just on the wrong track in terms of banning things and, you know, ridiculous labeling and on and on. And so that battle is going to continue. I sit on the board for Corteva, and, you know, it's something I pay a tremendous amount of attention to these days, but I always have. And I just think we've got to get out there more aggressively with our message that, look, people are trying to convince you that there's some hidden danger here or environmental thing that's going on, and it's just not the case. We just don't send stuff out into the marketplace that would do that. So, but, you know, the politics in Mexico has really been a handful. And, you know, they made a proposal recently that certain corn could come in. That's not, to me, we shouldn't be accepting that kind of thing. Why should we concede a point when there's no evidence there that what they're claiming is true? And that's, you know, it's kind of like when I was fighting with Japan to let our beef back into their marketplace as a result of BSE. They had no scientific evidence that our beef was problematic. They were doing it for trade purposes. And there's just too much of that out there.
Since Will works for the outfit that sponsors this event, he gets the last question.
Well, this just gets into the similar to this in terms of trade in China. And I guess for this kind of looking out on the horizon here for the next 5 years as well, what's the expectations with China that you can see at this point in terms of trade? For example, I know like Corteva was doing about 10% of its portfolio of business with China. Now it's down to less than 1%. We saw what happened with Syngenta, where they may have purposefully tanked the grain market, drove down the cost of the company, and then bought the company, and the World Trade Organization is refusing to investigate that. What are some thoughts that you could share with the public today on China at this point?
You know, I've been to China. I was part of the strategic negotiations that Hank Paulson put together when he was at Treasury during the Bush administration. Here's a couple of things I would share with you about China. China wants to be viewed as an independent world power. They don't want to sit down in a meeting and have me lecturing them on what they need to do with this, that, the next thing. they're extremely, extremely sensitive about that. And so I think relationship is hugely important here. China's frustrating. I would go to meetings after meeting after meeting. I would fly over to China and I would go to a meeting after we had talked about something for the last 10 meetings, and it was like we were starting over. It was almost like, wait a second, you were at those meetings too, what's going on here? But having said that, they need food. The other thing is China would like to be independent from a food standpoint, but for all that land mass, not a lot of it is usable to feed the population. I think if they had a reliable source of feeding their people, might be easier to work with. But I think China is a big issue for us for the next 5 years. And they will push back. If they're not satisfied with what's going on, they'll just say, sorry, we'll get our soybeans from Brazil or wherever. And so they will occupy a lot of time, attention, but I strongly say you can't walk away from that part of the world. You just can't. And I can cite the numbers of how much we sell to them and this, that, and the next thing. You don't need to hear that. I'm just saying it's a very, very significant part of the world, and we need to figure out a way to move through this very difficult, challenging relationship. The other thing that worries me a little bit, I worry that China's kind of moving more toward being more isolated, and that's a very concerning phenomenon. I don't think we want to end up there, and I don't think we want China to be friends with people who are enemies. I think the consequences of that are significant, but I'm going to wrap up and say don't minimize the potential there. China can be a tough neighbor to deal with, believe me. So.
All right. Mike, we've covered a lot of things, and like you say, we're kind of limited to what's right close to an hour here, I guess. You took us through the 3 Ps, the people, the policy, and the politics of the next Farm Bill. You get the last say now. So tell this group, what is the key to watch on this? You know, as we get into the new year, what is the main takeaway that you want these guys to remember, these guys and gals to remember about the 23 Farm Bill?
A couple of things. One is I want to continue to hear the chairs say we need a bipartisan farm bill. If somebody starts talking about this will be a Republican farm bill or it'll be a Democrat farm bill, then there won't be a farm bill because it can't get through the Senate. It just can't, and it needs 60 votes to get through the Senate. You need a bipartisan approach to this. Secondly, pay attention to the nutrition title. Now, you may be sitting there saying, wait a second, I farm. I'm not running the SNAP program. I know that, but that's 80% of the spending. And if negotiations break down on that piece of it, probably not going to get to the finish line. Not this year anyway. We'll get a farm bill at some point. I'd like to see it done in 23. You know, I've been there when it carried over year after year, and it's not the way to go. The next thing is pay a lot of attention to conservation and what strings are being suggested should be attached to funding for farm programs and for conservation, because I think that's a very, very dangerous road. We want to do the right thing for the environment. Farmers have always believed that. Ranchers have always believed that. But you start attaching strings, and it's just a whole different policy than I think what is good for Nebraska. So those would be my thoughts as we go forward, and maybe we can get back together in a year or so and celebrate the passage of a farm bill and figure out where I was wrong in all this.
Hey, let's put it on the calendar. We'll go ahead and plan on doing that next year, okay? Ladies and gentlemen, let's give former Secretary Mike Johanns a nice hand here.